Tucker Carlson invited on the governor of New Jersey, and he tried to play a game of gotcha with him in regards to the Bill of Rights and COVID-19.
So you made that decision, and as I noted before, 15 congregants at a synagogue in New Jersey were arrested and charged for being in a synagogue together. Now, the Bill of Rights, as you well know, protects Americans' right, enshrines their right to practice their religion as they see fit and to congregate together, to assemble peacefully. By what authority did you nullify the Bill of Rights in issuing this order? How do you have the power to do that?
That's above my pay grade, Tucker. So I wasn't thinking of the Bill of Rights when we did this. We went to first of all, we looked at the data and the science, and it says people have to stay away from each other. That's the best thing we could do to break the back of the curve of this virus that leads to lower hospitalizations and ultimately fatalities.
And I'm not contesting that, though. I think I do think there's a debate. This is a rolling conversation because we're learning new things every day, and nothing is settled at this point. Understood. But I do want, since you are an elected official, a leader in the government, an executive, how do you have the authority to order something that so clearly contravenes the Bill of Rights of the United States, the U.S. Constitution? Where do you get the authority to do that?
Well, here's the thing. We know we need to stay away from each other, number one. Number two, we do have broad authority within the state. And number three, we would never do that without coordinating, discussing, and hashing it out with the leaders, the variety of the leaders of the faith in New Jersey. We are among, if not the most diverse state in America, so we're used to that.
I'm sure that you talk to every rabbi and priest, but there's a deeper question here, and I'm just going to ask you one last time because I think it's important. I'm sure you've thought about this. You can't just, as the governor of a state, tell people who they can talk to when and where, because the Constitution of the United States, upon which all of this is based, prohibits you from doing that. So you clearly decided that you could do it. Did you consult an attorney about this? Did you? I mean, because this is a legal question as well as a medical one, isn't it?
I don't go to the men's room without consulting an attorney, so I guarantee you we did that. But I'll give you an example that was not related to the synagogue.
So the argument that Tucker is making is, hold on, you can't break up these religious functions where people are not socially distancing because the Bill of Rights protects freedom of religion. So for you to break it up means you're, oppressing people. It means you're overstepping the bounds of that which the government can legally and constitutionally do. And I have to say, and this is coming from, I consider myself like a hardcore civil libertarian. But, I think it's pretty clear that if there was ever an instance where, public safety overrides concerns like Tucker's laying out here, it's a pandemic. And, if for whatever reason one would question my own civil libertarian credentials, Glenn Greenwald, same thing. I mean, he was a First Amendment lawyer. So you want to talk about a guy who really is willing to, believe in his principles and take it to its logical conclusion to the point where you literally defend like neo-Nazis and their right to free speech. Like, we get it. But if there was ever an instance where, public health and safety can reasonably be said to override other immediate concerns, it's a pandemic. Now, if you want to say, well, okay, but we need to be clear and have a clear delineation of, I don't know why, but that doesn't sound like a word right now, even though I know it is, of when we're in crisis versus when we're not in a crisis. Because what a lot of conservatives fear, and what Tucker's alluding to here is, well, if the government can break up a religious function today, then why wouldn't they be able to break it up when we're not in a time of crisis? When, the government could just go in there and break it up for whatever reason they want, or non-reason. They could just do it. And, I think that's why it makes sense to clearly delineate when we are in a crisis and when we're not in a crisis. And maybe it makes sense to actually have some court cases over this to get the rules exactly correct. But, I would say that I do think it's very, very hyperbolic to think that the government would ever break up religious functions without it being absolutely necessary, like in a pandemic time. Because, I guess you could make the argument that perhaps the people who would be most likely to have a religious function broken up, not in a time of crisis, would be Muslims. But I guarantee you that the same right-wingers who are concerned about, churches being told to break up now would not be so concerned about, mosques being told to break up in a hypothetical future where there's no crisis and the government breaks them up. But I don't think, I have to say, I think that all of the arguments that the government might continue to do this not in a time of crisis, I think that's super duper far-fetched. Now, again, that doesn't mean that, civil liberties are negotiable, because I don't think they are. But in a time of pandemic, we do have a crisis right now. And this is the part of the conversation that Tucker didn't really entertain and Governor Murphy was too kind to say, but I'll say it. In many fundamentalist communities, they don't listen to secular authorities. They don't listen. And there are a couple of Orthodox Jewish communities in New Jersey, and they simply don't listen. And that without the government intervening, without the government making an example, these 15 people in a synagogue when they shouldn't be, you would have, this virus would so rapidly and quickly rip through that entire community in a way that would be so devastating. So this really is an instance of no, we actually know what's better for you than you do, because you are ignoring the science, ignoring the reality. You've made a habit of it. And as a result of that, there are dire, dire consequences. So that's the other part of this conversation, that people are not really willing to entertain and go down that road, but keep it real. And it's not just the Orthodox Jewish community. I don't want to only pick on them, but we've seen it with Christian fundamentalists. There was one in Tampa, Florida. The guy got arrested. And there are a bunch of others across the country where, for whatever reason, Christian fundamentalists, Orthodox Jews, they say, no, we're above it, and those rules don't apply to us, and we're not going to listen to you, and we also don't think that we're in any danger, so we're just going to plow forward as if everything's okay. But in the process of doing that, you not only put yourself at risk, you put everybody who you're ever in contact with at risk, because it's so easy for one person to continue to spread the virus. So, listen, I think this conversation, I think this debate is interesting because there is a real issue of what is the government allowed to do, what are they not allowed to do? Should it have been the government stepping in and going, hey, you can't be this close to each other, but if you all stand 10 feet apart from each other, if you all wear masks, then you can continue with your religious ceremony. Should it have been just regulation? Or does the government have the authority and the ability to step in and say, you got to break this whole thing up? I think there's a genuine conversation there, but I don't really think that there's as much of a conversation as Tucker does when he insists no, the government doesn't even have the right to step in. Well, if the federal government acknowledges and the state government acknowledges that we're in an emergency situation, we're in a crisis, we have a pandemic, and people are violating those very basic pandemic rules, I disagree. I think they do. I think it's incumbent on them. I think it's a necessity that they step in, not just that they have the right to do it. I think it makes sense that they have to step in. So, but I do think that in this case, what Tucker's doing is more honestly pandering to his audience a little bit and trying to, make them think that there's this very serious problem of and there's a narrative I've seen on the right a lot more these days of the government is anti-religion, usually they make the case anti-Christian. I've seen more of that. In this case, they're talking about Jewish folks, but the government is anti-religion, and you don't want to give them too much power because then they're really going to take away, all of your rights, whether it's freedom of speech, whether it's religious liberty, And I think they're making it a bigger deal than it really is. I think that I think it's a big stretch, and the only reason the government is doing what they're doing on this front really is public safety, and really is, you know. And by the way, we're talking about at the federal government level. Trump has done a lot of these rules. So are you going to blame him and say he's part of like the evil conspiracy against religious people? In this case, it's easier for Tucker because there's a Democratic governor in New Jersey. So he thinks like, oh, I could play gotcha with this guy because he's a Democratic governor, and I'll make him look like he's anti-religion and he's, you know, coming to take away your rights. When again, the fact of the matter is, there is a debate about where the line is and what you can and can't do. But overall, no, this is flat out a matter of public safety. And, you know, I think it's perfectly reasonable and understandable that the government steps in and forces communities who are otherwise ignoring all these important rules to do the right thing.